Anyway, so the tenets of lean. We hear about it's eliminating waste. Well, maybe it's about eliminating waste, but personally I don't find that a good way to think about it. I find it's much better to think about it as it's not creating the waste in the first place. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, take a look at this picture. So we have two ditch diggers here. And yeah, this guy is throwing dirt into that guy's hole. Now, think about, why is he doing it? Well, he probably doesn't notice it. Maybe he dislikes that guy, but probably he's just not aware of it. And he's also probably not being measured as to how fast the whole team gets the ditch dug. It's how fast does he get his ditch dug. Now, let me ask you, you see this guy? There's dirt that was already there and dirt that's been thrown in. To him, is there any difference between that dirt? There's no difference. So if you say eliminate waste, there's no waste to eliminate, is there? You've got to step out of his hole kind of to see where it's coming from. That's kind of my point. Now you can say, well, we don't do stuff like this in software. And I would say, yeah, I'm glad you laughed. Because I think this is mostly what we do in software, is digging out the dirt from somebody else's hole. My own estimate, about 80%, 90% of the work we do is that. Most people think it's more like 30 to 70%, but some people have estimated it to be as high as 95%. Now let's look at this for a little bit. I like running experiments. I like when I will say a lot of things, I'm going to be asserting things. An assertion is a statement that I'm saying this is true and I have evidence for it. But I'm going to do a different kind of assertion. I'm going to be making assertions where I'm saying this is true and you have evidence for it. Or if you don't, you need to raise your hand and tell me you don't. Now what do I mean by this? I'm going to say things and I want you to look in your own experience and see if what I said is true or not. Don't just agree or disagree. I really want you to look in your own experience when I make an assertion and then see if in your experience if it's true or not. Does that make sense? And then you can believe it or not. And if you disagree, raise your hand and talk about it, because I'm not trying to sell you anything, I'm trying to discover something. So I'm going to suggest these are the main things we do in development that are good things. In other words, we get value from doing this. Understanding requirements, planning, design, collaboration. This is all good stuff. We have to do this to some level. Probably not complete, but more or less there. Okay, but this is some stuff we do that doesn't really add value. You ever redo requirements? Yeah. This is like the dirt out of the hole that the other guy threw in. Yep. You ever work from old requirements? Okay. You ever build unneeded features? These two go together, by the way. Anybody ever fix a bug? Okay, now this is a trick question, but I'll still give you the t-shirt opportunity, okay? So for 10 years I've been asking this question to thousands and thousands of people, because I do this in my training, I do it in my seminars. Even once did it in a webinar with a few hundred people out there, said, give me your address, I'll mail you a t-shirt. And the question was, have you ever, or do you even know of anybody who has ever spent a significant amount of their time, most of their time, fixing bugs? Okay, well, t-shirt opportunity. I got some cool t-shirts. And I don't think so. I don't think so. And I think I can convince you in about 2 minutes that you haven't, that you've been doing something else, thinking it's been fixing. That's why it's in quotes. So let's take a case, because I can remember my worst bug in history. I mean, this was a disaster. I literally spent probably about 2 months. I mean, over 4 years, 2 months of work trying to find this stupid thing. The fix itself was maybe an hour. See, the rest of the time I was looking for it. See, looking for it and fixing it are two different things. You ever get a repairman and charge you 98% of the time for, yeah, I know what's wrong, but I didn't do it. You won't want to pay that 98%. See, think of the time somebody tells you there's a bug, and then you go trying to replicate it, and then you go do something you think will fix it, but then you got to spend more time undoing that because you broke something else. Notice that this time you've not fixed it. I would suggest that most of what we call fixing is finding. Let's imagine I'm programming, and I make a bug. That's another insight, by the way. Programmers put their bugs into the code. They don't just show up in the middle of the night when gremlins do it. That's not how it works. Although you hear them talk about it that way, right? I found a bug. Yeah. Like, I didn't put it there. I don't know. It's just there all of a sudden. So, I mean, it's actually a good question to ask. What were you doing when you put a bug in your code? You know, job security maybe, but usually it's accidental. But anyway, So I'm typing away and I put a bug in my code and I compile it. And then somebody says, oh, you made a mistake, like just 10 minutes later. Doesn't take me too long to fix, does it? Because it's all fresh in my head. I see all the situation. Now take the exact same situation, exact same bug, but my buddy's not there. And 2 weeks go by, and now I get the bug report. If it took me an hour before, will it take me an hour now? Will it even take me an hour and 10 minutes where you give me 10 minutes to get my head back wrapped around it? No, see, it's not just task switching either. Something happens between the time here. Now, all this extra work, by the way, if it took me an hour before and 4 hours later, that 3 hours is not semantics. That 3 hours is new work that was not there before. Is that true? See, it's interesting. The phenomenon of delay, I will say, creates work for us. I call this induced work. The phenomenon, by the way, notice if I do requirements really early and I have to redo them, that creates work for us as well. It's another kind of induced work. You see that? It's kind of interesting because we all see this, but we don't even usually have a term for it. Anyway, imagine I write the bug and 2 weeks later I'm told about it, and imagine 5 other groups have been in that code since. Now it's even worse. But notice, even if that didn't happen, it still works. Delay only by itself will change and add work. But then if other people are involved, which they typically are, if you're in this room wanting to know how to do this at the enterprise, it gets much worse. Okay. Overbuilding frameworks is something that happens, and guess what? Integration errors. You might notice there's a trick question here. See, in 40 years, I'm sure I've seen an integration error at least once. But I know I've never seen it more than 2 or 3 times. I'm not saying I haven't seen a lot of errors detected in integration. Right? You've all seen errors detected in integration, but is that an integration error? What is an integration error? Doesn't that mean I'm integrating and I'm doing it wrong? Like you and I had worked on something and you said use version 72 and I said use version 71 and for some reason the integrator pulled the wrong branch. That's an integration error, isn't it? Well, I mean, he integrates incorrectly. But what if I'm working with another team and we make an agreement on what the API is supposed to look like? And then I just decided, oh, it's easier if I do it this way, and I just neglect to tell the other person? That'll be detected in integration. I know that never happens. Actually, it was actually that incident that got me into agility, was when a hardware group neglected to tell the software group that the API changed because they figured it's just software and won't cause any problems. The problem was the API changed and nobody told anybody. They got out of sync. That happens really early, right? And the real challenge, the real cost, is that we didn't detect it until later. Does that make sense? So I'm going to suggest, I don't really know, maybe this happens more often than I think, but I think 99% or more, actually I think more like 99.99% of things we call integration errors are actually things that happen way early in the scheme and were detected in integration. Now it's funny, when a tester tests code and it doesn't work, they don't call it a testing error, they call it a bug, right? That's something in code. Come up with a name for that earlier, but in integration we just kind of call it an integration problem. It's not. It's a way off early on, somebody diverged. So it's kind of interesting if we look at this and we want to say, well, how can we get better at this kind of stuff? Well, one way would be just stop doing this. Of course, you can't just do that because if you need to, you got to. But maybe stop doing what causes this. Now let's look at it. Maybe we can get faster. Have speech therapy lessons so people can talk quicker. That might help some of these. You could maybe automate testing. That does save some time. And by the way, test automation, the reason you want to automate testing or create testing before you write code is not for the speed of it, it's for the communication of it anyway. So you're not making a significant improvement here. But look at these. What causes redoing requirements? Age, time, right? Same thing working from these. I would say building even unneeded features is the lack of feedback to, you get this big amount of requirements, build huge things. Overbuilding frameworks is more of a technical knowledge problem. This is talked about in several books. Bob Martin's book, Agile Software Development. Design Patterns Explained, one of my first books, still very current in my mind, is about how to use and write code so it can change easily. Emergent Design by Scott Bain is another good book. So this talk is really about how do we do this. I want you to ask a question. I want you to write this down. What percentage of your time do you spend on the left side? Not you personally, but your organization. Including the business. From the idea, when ideas come, until They're done until the customer gets it. How much do you spend your time on the good stuff? A bit more of a range. I usually get somewhere between 30 to 70%. Okay, now wherever you are, whatever your number is, I'm going to suggest this, that if the number is significantly large here, you might be better off working on eliminating this than trying to do this better. Okay, and in a lot of ways, this is the main tenet of Lean, that shortening cycle time raises productivity and quality while lowering cost. See, if cycle time is the time from when I get an idea until it's consumed by the customer. So I call it concept to consumption. You know, Mary and Tom Poppendieck like calling it concept to cash, but that's the time I get paid for it. Customers don't get any value at that point. I want to make sure the customer is getting value. My business value and the customer value need to be aligned. So it's from concept to consumption. Basically, if I shorten that whole time, then the time from when I write a bug until I get it detected has to be quick. If I shorten that, I lower the error rate. Right? In fact, if I shorten it enough, I'll almost detect my errors as soon as I write them. If I am doing very agile methods, I'll get a requirement, I'll implement it almost immediately. I'll do it in very thin slivers.
Thanks for watching this lightning webinar brought to you by Net Objectives. We're committed to equipping our clients with effective business-driven software development methods so they can be more successful. Please let us know how we could help you. Visit us at www.netobjectives.com.